Graham, your neighborhood sociologist, with a video about social contagion and why I think that it is misused and it hurts trans persons. Now, this is a live stream. I haven't done one in a while, so I don't expect any viewers. Also, I'm trying to use Restream again. I've had trouble with it in the past, but I'm going to try and make it work because it's so user friendly. So let's see what happens in the next 15 or 20 minutes. So the first thing that I'd like to do is explain why I'm talking about this issue of social contagion. We all kind of know what it is. If we don't, in brief, it's this idea, or this theory, I should say, that ideas spread through a population, or even emotions spread through a population quickly, spontaneously. Okay, that's the value neutral understanding of social contagion. I don't like how it's being used because it's not used in a value neutral way. So the idea itself is just a theory, and it's fine. But it's being deployed, in my view, by gender critical folks and anti woke people to push back against the rise of trans persons in society. The idea being that, well, these young people who say they're trans, this is inauthentic. This isn't thought through. They're just under the spell of a contagion. Their friends are doing it, or they saw it on Instagram, so now they're doing it. And so it's being deployed in this way to delegitimize trans persons, especially young people. Okay. So that's why I don't necessarily like it. So in other words, I have no problem with a theory that explains how ideas move through society. And this is one of them. And I think it can explain some ideas. Unfortunately, it's being deployed to push back against the rise of trans persons. And I think that's very hurtful. So what I want to do is sort of dive into this and tell a little story first, right? Because I want to set up this idea, or set up the notion that I know what I'm talking about, right? So this book is it's called The Crowd. It's from a French psychologist who wrote about the French Revolution. Oh no, actually no, this was later than the French Revolution. This was sometime later, when there's a lot of riots in France, I think in the late 1800s. And he's a psychologist, and he was trying to explain how it is that you had these people who would just have these emotions run through a crowd, right? So there'd be this crowd, and this is how he described it. So this was 10, 15 years ago when I kind of read this book. So I'm just kind of going from memory. But he was trying to explain how one person in the crowd would do something emotional or say something, and then other people in the crowd would take it on, and it would spread like a brush fire through everyone in the crowd, and all of a sudden you get a riot, right? He was trying to explain that. I believe at the time I was reading this, maybe it wasn't 10 or 15 years ago, but I was reading it because I was trying to understand flaming and trolling. So those of you who don't know, my research interests are on online deviance and cybercrime. And so I think maybe I was either writing a paper or I was writing my textbook, and I had to explain how flaming and trolling occurs. Okay. And so the idea that psychologists have is that people online see themselves as being an anonymous crowd. And so this is interesting how I ended up reading this book, or reading excerpts from this book, because Laban's ideas are the precursor to more modern psychological ideas of de-individuation and disinhibition. So the idea that I eventually came to when I was writing about flaming and trolling is that psychologists explain these outbursts online, and that people believe that they are anonymous, or that they are a part of a crowd, and they lose their individuality. And if a lot of people are acting like jerks online, they'll act like jerks online, right? So that's the so that's how that occurred. Um, Me reading that book and coming to that conclusion. So I'm bringing this up because when I think about social contagion, I'm coming at it from a different angle than most folks. Okay, like I accept that there can be such a thing as social contagion and it can occur, but as I understand it, it occurs in circumscribed situations, in crowds. A good example would actually be in a at a football game or something, right? Where you can have emotion spreading through a football stadium or a sports stadium. It doesn't matter. Have to be. It doesn't have to be football. And it just spreads spontaneously, right? Like anger, like someone gets mad and people start yelling at each other or something, or even happiness or something. Who knows? So this is where I'm starting. This is where I'm starting from. Okay. Now, if you go on Wikipedia, because I gave a definition of social contagion, but it's just kind of off the cuff definition. This is how Wikipedia describes it. Social contagion involves behavior, emotions, or conditions spreading spontaneously through a group or network. Okay, so that's the idea. The phenomenon has been discussed by social scientists since the late 19th century. I assume that is Gustave Le Bon who started this off. Although much work on the subject was based on unclear or even contradictory conceptions of what social contagion is, so exact definitions vary. That's okay. Definitions can vary, but we all understand the phenomenon, and we try and describe it and work with the definitions that we have. All right. So this is what social contagion is. I have no problem with this theory. I think that it can explain certain things. If you have people in a crowd and you notice that emotion spread through the crowd quickly. So maybe one person starts crying, then all of a sudden, a lot of people start crying. I remember I was with a group of people during the night that Obama won the presidency the first time, and one woman started crying. And all of a sudden, everyone in that room just got really sad. And I was fighting back the tears because it was like an amazing thing that a black person had won the presidency. And so she started crying, and then other people. That's social contagion, right? And that's the emotional version of it. But ideas can spread too. I can imagine you working in a group of 5 or 6 people, or even more, and one person comes up with an idea, and it just spreads through that tight knit network. Okay, so I'm not saying that social contagion can't explain things, but what gender critical folks are doing and anti-woke folks are doing is they're applying this idea not because they're trying to explain anything about trans persons. They're actually trying to delegitimate trans persons by saying, oh, you know what? You're not really trans. You know, you're just, it's just some idea that your friends had or someone on Instagram had. So therefore, you're just adopting it. It's inauthentic, right? And this is what I'm pushing back against. So on Twitter, I tweeted this. It's kind of a joke in a way, but I was getting to a point. Is it fair to say anti-wokes are a typo here, a victims? Is it fair to say anti-wokes are victims of a social contagion? Right? In the span of 3 to 5 years, anti-wokeism has exploded amongst a group of people who were influenced by YouTubers. Okay. So the same parameters that are used to explain the rise in trans persons, right? Explosion amongst the population in a short amount of time, and influencers possibly contributing to that explosion. I'm using it with these anti-woke people who are always complaining about wokeism. So should I call anti-wokes victims of social contagion? Because they certainly weren't talking about wokeism 6 years ago. Well, I'm being a bit silly here, but I'm getting to the point that the way social contagion is used by the gender critical crowd and others is just an inaccurate usage of it, or at least a sort of clunky usage. In fact, the way they're using it, all ideas are are some kind of or not all ideas, but all people are victims of social contagion. This is wrong, and there's a better explanation for why it is you are seeing more trans persons in society, especially young people. And the explanation I'm using is coming from what I would say the symbolic interactionist line of thought, right? Which is that human beings are meaning making creatures. So I was communicating online with some folks, and finally, I got around to explaining how I think these things go down with trans persons and people in general, like how we adopt ideas. So I think the contagion theory leaves much to be desired. Yes, I do. Instead, people seek narratives that explain their world in ways that conform the most to their interests and values, right? So people have an array of ideas that they have access to. And so, okay, they've got things going on in their lives. They've got interests, they've got values and beliefs, and there are things that they're seeing. It's almost like there's a nexus here where you've got the phenomena that they're dealing with, then they've got their interests, and then they've got their values that they bring into a scene. Okay, so you need ideas to make sense of that, right? To make sense of that conglomeration or confluence of phenomena, right? So people seek narratives that explain their world in ways that conform the most to their interests and values. Now, few people are idea creators, so they choose from the array of ideas presented by people in power. So let's say that you are someone living in Oklahoma, and you are living in some rural part of the state. I guess most of it's rural. And you're living in a rural part of the state, and you're seeing these things on TV about all these trans persons, and this is weird to you. You're a Christian. You didn't grow up around this stuff, but you're seeing that phenomena. Okay, how do you explain it? What array of ideas do you have out there? Okay, so then you turn on Fox News, and maybe I don't know what Tucker Carlson has said about this, but he did actually have on the Libs of TikTok person on one of his shows. So anyway, you turn on Fox News, and they present to you some ideas that help you understand this situation in ways that are most concordant with your interests and values. That to me is what I think happens, because now you make meaning of your life. The ideas that you take in, or this particular idea that you've taken in about this phenomenon you experience, helps you explain it. And it explains it in ways that conforms to your values and also benefits your interests. So that's what happens. And I'm coming at this from the symbolic interactionist tradition in sociology, but I think this is a common approach. I mean, even Marxists use this idea. They say the powerful, like, sort of impose ideas on society, this type of thing. I mean, so this is not a radical or new idea. I guess Marxism is radical, but the idea that people choose ideas to make sense of their world is not strange or new or different. Now, unlike the social contagion idea, I'm arguing here, and this particular explanation argues that people have agency. They have agency, and they have issues that they're trying to deal with. So look, you've got a kid. So suppose you've got a young person 40 years ago who is dealing with sexual identity issues. All right. Unfortunately for that person, there was not that person on Instagram to present the idea that what they are dealing with is a trans issue. Also, they weren't in a society that was so tolerant of sexual expression. So they, unfortunately for those kids 40 years ago, they didn't have the same array of ideas to choose from to make sense of their sexual identity. So what did they do? They probably chose from the Christian box, which told them something's wrong with you, right? Or they chose from the neighborhood psychologist box, who says, you're just going through something crazy here, just ignore it, or something like that. Those are the ideas they had to work with, and so they used them to make sense of the world. But kids today, well, now they have a wider array. There's still that Christian explanation out there, that, okay, God made you this certain way, and why are you trying to be something you're not. And there's also the anti-woke explanation of whatever that is, the gender critical explanation, the conservative explanation. But then there's also explanation from trans persons that says, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. If you it is possible that, yes, you have a penis or you have a vagina, but you want to live your life opposite to your biological sex, that is fine. And I'm going to give myself as an example. That's the difference. That's the difference. They can take that idea now and make meaning of their lives. So I guess that's good. I think I've kind of explained myself here in about 15 minutes. I hope people come across this video, because that social contagion idea is very damaging. It just dismisses the experiences of trans persons, and I mean that's just very unfortunate, right? I mean these are our fellow citizens and fellow human beings, and people people are trying to live their lives, and we should allow them to express themselves as much as possible. Now, before wrapping up, I can anticipate one concern. Kids do not know, right? Um, are they? Do they have the experiences and the wherewithal to know that they're actually trans? That is a legitimate question. That is a legitimate question. That's actually different than the social contagion idea. Actually, I think in that case, what we need is more research, more study, and to be more open with trans issues so that young people can speak with parents, can speak with health professionals, and get a sense of what's going on and whether or not they really are trans, or it's just they're just going through a phase. I would never deny that. It is actually true that kids go through phases and they think all kind of crazy things. I went through phases. I didn't go through a trans phase, but I went through a lot of phases, and I realized that okay, that was just me just being silly for 3 months out of my life. So, I mean, that does happen. That does happen. So I'm not dismissing that. What I'm actually trying to get at is that the idea of social contagion is incredibly damaging because it will dismiss a lot of people who are actually trans. All right. Thank you for listening. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and have a good day.